call. My name is Alan Gold. I'm with Tradestone Software, and I'm going to be your host for today's event. We're very excited to be bringing you today's webinar entitled Getting It Right the First Time, Designing and Delivering Merchandise That Sells. Today we'll hear about how retailers that use private label merchandise to highlight their value message and gross margins are increasing their product offering year over year. But this growth also presents some challenges for the retailer. Product quality is a challenge. Processes and procedures are often difficult to police and manage, even in the very best of cases. Dependable suppliers are very difficult to find and in many cases difficult to keep. And perhaps equally important, there are many, many systems that are tied together to make all of this work. And very often that cobbling job has its downside, causes inefficiencies, and presents other problems for a clean flow of merchandise. But today what you'll hear about is how smart retailers are applying best practices to design and deliver merchandise that sells and doing it in a way that I think represents an example for others who are looking to improve their systems. We'll also make sure that there's time at the end of the webinar for your questions. So let me go through a little housekeeping for you with regard to that. You'll note on your screen, usually in the upper right-hand corner, that there'll be a little box from the webinar system that will allow you to type in your questions. We'll record them here and pass them on to our guest speaker. If we don't wind up with time for your questions due to the length of the list, we'll make sure to provide one-on-one responses. We want everyone to go away having had their questions answered. One quick bit of housekeeping. We have quite a number of attendees on the call today. So if I could ask you to keep your lines muted. We have it in listen-only mode as well, but as an extra precaution to background noise, that would be most appreciated. I'd also, just before we start, I'd like to take just a moment for those of you who aren't familiar with Tradestone Software to tell you just a little bit about what we do. If we could just change to the next slide, and we have. We provide merchandise lifecycle management solutions for retailers, for brand manufacturers, and retail suppliers. Our approach incorporates PLM, specifically for retail, sourcing, order management, logistics, and finance, and we tie all of that into a single system that creates a unified buying process. And in particular, it creates an integrated merchandise backbone for retailers and their manufacturer partners. What's important, I think, to everyone on this call and to the market in general is that we are retailers. We come from that industry. We understand the world that most of you on this call work in, and we're actively committed to collaboration with the industry and with our partners in really everything that we do. We believe that input from customers, participating in industry standards, bodies, and working with manufacturers all give us the opportunity to put something together that provides best practices for everyone. So that's it for our commercial message, and now for the real reason why we're here today. I'm very pleased to introduce Paula Rosenblum, Paula Rosenblum, Managing Partner of Retail Systems Research. We're particularly pleased to have her with us today because she's widely recognized as one of the top analysts in the retail industry. She formerly was Vice President of Research and Content at Retail Systems Alert Group, and she was also Vice President of Aberdeen Group's retail practice. She, prior to that, was also Research Director for Retail with AMR Research. Paul has also spent over 20 years as a retail technology executive, and she's been a CIO. She's also a member of the American Apparel and Footwear Association's Supply Chain Leadership Council, and she's also a member of the advisory board for its semi-annual Material World Trade Show. Paula received her MBA from Northeastern University, and her focus was in high technology management. So we're delighted to have her with you today to share her research and her insights, and I'll be back to take questions at the end. Thanks for attending. Paula, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot. Hi, everybody. My name's Paula Rosenblum, and I don't change job as often as Ken made it sound. Anyway, what I'm going to go through today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about our company and the methodology that we use to analyze retail challenges. Then I'm going to go through kind of some results from a benchmark study that we did in cooperation with Tradestone and another company as well. Give you the report highlights, let you know a bit about the kinds of people who responded to this survey, and then go through the report findings. And finally, what does it mean for you, most importantly? So first, who are we and what do we do? Who is RSR? RSR Research, or Retail Systems Research, are a group of retail industry veterans. We've all been around the industry a long time. Nikki Baird, the partner you can see on the left over here, she was originally with retailers, and then she moved on to be with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Then she went to the vendor community, and finally went to work for Forrester before she joined up with us. Next is me. You've heard about me. Following is Brian Kilcourse, who was the CIO of Long Drugs for a very long time, and has been around. Was one of the top 100 CIOs in the industry, voted by CIO Magazine, I believe. And finally, Steve Rowan, who also has a long background in retail research. Our research products include the kinds of benchmark reports that we're going to show you today, custom research, and comparative personal benchmarks for retailers as well. That's kind of who we are, and our goal is we want to be the best. We don't do competitive analysis at all. We don't do vendor landscapes. What we do is market intelligence. We take a look and see how retail winners win. And to do that, we use a methodology that we call the boot. And this is a pretty simple methodology, and it works pretty nicely. The first element of the boot is business challenges. Every enterprise, retailer or otherwise, faces external challenges that they have to respond to. And from out of those business challenges, they'll come up with some strategic and tactical opportunities, or ways they can turn the lemons of those business challenges into the lemonade of opportunities. But there are often internal challenges, or what we call organizational inhibitors, that might keep a retailer from taking advantage of those opportunities that they've articulated and defined. If they can find a way to overcome those, there are technology enablers that they can use to support taking advantage of those opportunities. And why this is all interesting is we find when we work this model, which we do with all our survey instruments, that retail winners, which are those enterprises whose year-over-year comp store sales generally outperform inflation, that the fact that they sell more stuff isn't, oops, sorry, I didn't realize that mouse was going to do that. I apologize. They don't just sell more stuff, but they also tend to think and act differently than their competitors. So as we work through this model, what we find is that winners often answer the questions differently, and they articulate their issues differently. We also find this is true of retailers of different size, which is more of our focus today, and often in different segments as well. So let's go through some quick cliff notes or the report highlights. First, overall, the State of the Union. And I think you got a hint of this before. Private label has been around a really long time. So it's a pretty mature process. I mean, I actually know Sue Welsh, the CEO of Tradestone, for more than 25 years because I worked for a company that she supported with what we called import management at the time. So it's a very mature process, but it's typically supported by very, very fragmented and immature technologies. And what we find is that there's a real predominant sense of this is how we've always done it. But there was a shift in the early 2000s. The retail community got very strongly into bidding events and reverse auctions. And while we've started to back away from that over the last 5 years, challenges and opportunities kind of remain that are legacies from that era. And it's kind of disappointing to see that we haven't been able to move beyond them. Because what has changed for sure is that retailers now want dependable partners, and they want to collaborate with their suppliers. And they are, in fact, collaborating more. But they do frighteningly little to actually scorecard and audit what's happened. And again, as I said before, in this particular survey, we found that the differences came out much more as a function of retailer size than by performance levels. Not surprisingly, this comes out in almost all our studies. The existing tangled technology infrastructures that we carry with us is the single biggest thing that keeps us from taking advantage of the opportunities we seek. Also, a holistic view of PLM and sourcing is lacking. There's a real confusion we find between what's a feature and what's an application. And as a result, again, the technology is fragmented, the process is a little bit disjointed, and there's inefficiencies remain. So where we see that we need to go is pretty simple. It's something we call the virtuous cycle. And it's not complicated. Create long-term contracts with trusted partners. Work collaboratively to develop new products. This half, you'll find, actually happens quite a bit. What doesn't happen as often, which is really rather surprising to us, is to ensure that in-house agents perform audits prior to release from the factory, and finally to scorecard suppliers on all elements of product and delivery. So what we find here is there's been a pretty substantial uptick over the past 5 years in the top 2 items in the cycle, and not nearly enough on the bottom 2, which leads to persistent problems that retailers need to face. And we call this virtuous cycle our best practices in supplier relationship management. So with that, why does private label matter? Let's have an overview. Well, private label matters because larger retailers in particular sell a lot of private label product. We did a survey like this before in 2008, and I've done them before in years prior. And we asked what percentage of the merchandise that you sell is your private brand. And you can see that on the surface, the volume of private label seems to have decreased a little bit in 2010 from 2008, until you look at the billion plus. And there you can see that private label is just continuing to increase. And the reason why is pretty obvious. It's a gross margin opportunity. It's kind of free money. It gets you out of a lot of complicated issues. So clearly the larger retailers continue to execute, to exert their force to sell more private label merchandise. And you can see that the percentage of private label as part of the overall mix by revenue continues to increase. While smaller retailers were fearful in a period of down sales to increase their private label product, and also I think they had more of a challenge around getting the credit that they needed to provide the working capital for private label product. So more of them tended to stay the same if they were under $1 billion a year in revenue than those who were over $1 billion a year in revenue. And you can see that only 30% stayed the same for those who sell $1 billion or more per year, versus 44% of those with revenues of under $1 billion a year. And again, you can see that there are consistent increases amongst those who are larger. And again, one thing we know is, as much as we're all really glad 2009 is behind us, we know that in a period of down sales, added gross margin from private label product is really a boon. And here you can see that this is clear. Why earnings stayed strong is, again, gross margin continued to increase, particularly amongst the largest retailers. 60% reported continued increases in gross margin over the past 3 years, which is pretty consistent with what we saw 2 years ago. And I'm going to quote out of this report because this is pretty powerful. Most retailers with annual revenues greater than $1 billion were able to sustain the gross margin increases they reported prior to the recession, while only 16% of smaller retailers were able to continue those improvements. So clearly, in a period when working capital is constrained, size matters. But as working capital starts to ease up, we can see there's lots of opportunity for people to continue improving their their private label mix. And the reason why to do that is because over the long term, you find that comparable store sales also tend to rise. We asked for those who based on their performance, again, whether they overperformed inflation, whether they performed at inflation, or they performed beneath the rate of inflation, how had they changed their gross, how had they changed the percentage of their product that was private label. And you can see clearly that retail winners had increased substantially more than laggards, those who underperformed. So clearly there's value to adding private label. Now, just to give you an idea of who we were talking to, this is some quick respondent profiles. I would imagine when the report will be available to you after the webinar. This is kind of gone through in detail in the report, but you can get a sense of it here in front of you. The mix between fast-moving consumer goods, general merchandise and apparel, and other retail segments. Revenue bands, we had a substantial chunk below 50 million, another chunk up to a billion, and then you can see a nice amount of billion or better. And you can see the titles. They were people who kind of knew what they were talking about, if you will. Geographically, we were about 3/4 came from the United States, 7% from the United Kingdom, and you can see these numbers. But what you can also see is how global retail is really going. So while there may be no one who's got a headquarters in Canada, 21% of the respondents have retail presence there. While only 5% may have their headquarters in Latin America, 21% sell product there, have a retail presence there. And why that's important is you've got to get this private label product around the world. So what are the business challenges? Now we're going to move into kind of analyzing the boot. What are the business challenges? The problems seem simple, yet they've proven to be intractable. In the headlines, how do we shift from what we created in the early 21st century and the late 20th century, which is adversarial, low-cost provider relationships, to one of partnership? We clearly have a legacy of reverse auctions and bidding events, which creates mistrust. There has been some attempt over the last couple of years to slow down time to market a little bit just to improve merchandise quality. Hasn't helped much. We also find that merchandise transit times, the times that they take to get from the point of source to the point of sale, are clearly longer than they should be, but we also found pretty unrealistic expectations of what they should be, given where retailers generally source from. So here, if we take a look at some of the charts, you can see that no significant change over the past 3 years. Finding and keeping dependable partners remains a top 3 business challenge for 52% of our respondents. 45% of our respondents report inconsistent product quality as a key issue. That's one of their top 3 business challenges. And then finally, this geographically broad supply chain slows down reaction time. I can tell you, if you go to our website, you can see a report that we did in 2008, and there has been no significant change at all. These are pretty consistent with the numbers that we saw back then. But what we did find is that retailers have given back time to volume improvements. And that means that they've slowed the time that it takes them to get a product from source to shelf. They gave back pretty much half of it. Now, if we look at differences by performance, we find that retail winners are most concerned about finding and keeping dependable partners. They're more concerned about inconsistent product quality rather dramatically. Laggards feel most vulnerable to supply chain shocks, and they find least compliance to their specifications. And probably disconcerting to us, no retail winners felt they had a problem getting their arms around the total landed cost of product. And a pretty small percentage of average performers and laggards also expressed this concern. We believe this is a problem. We know that generally merchants and product managers are measured more on gross margin as a percentage of sale. And we don't find there's a lot of understanding total landed cost or loaded cost. Doesn't mean we believe that we need to get to something as granular as activity-based costing, but we believe that overall retailers are missing an opportunity to understand what merchandise is really costing them. in general. Annual revenue-wise, we saw some interesting differences as well. Retailers with annual revenue under $1 billion are far more concerned with slower reaction time, and larger retailers are more apt to cite inconsistent product quality than smaller retailers. They buy more of it. I would imagine they're using more factories, and therefore the inconsistency of the quality hits them more strongly. Now, this was kind of a really surprising finding for us. It's the kind of question that we ask every year, every time we do one of these surveys, and yet this is kind of surprising. We ask, what's the ideal amount of time it should take factory shipments of private label products to reach your local distribution centers or stores? And if you remember, the preponderance of retailers who responded, I think about two-thirds of the retailers who responded sell general merchandise and apparel, which means most of it is coming from overseas, particularly if 81% are selling in America. 44% of respondents felt that ideally they should be able to get product from the factory to either their DC dock or their stores in less than 3 weeks. The reality, of course, is very different, with more than 50%, as you can see, having it take more than 4 weeks. So the real question we had to ask ourselves is, can product actually go from Shanghai to Manhattan in less than 3 weeks? And if it can't, what are we missing in terms of understanding where the bottlenecks are, where the opportunities to improve transit times are, and what are the effective things that we can do about them? So this is the level of concern that came up for us, that we have unrealistic expectations, so not surprisingly those expectations aren't being met. We believe that probably if you're shipping from, let's say, Shanghai to Manhattan, somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks is probably a reasonable time. Less than 3 weeks, it just seems pretty unreasonable to us. So we believe that one of the outcomes of this is it would be wise to really understand the bottlenecks of each step of the supply chain process. So with those as the challenges, what are the opportunities that we see? Well, we collaborate, we know that, and we certainly see that we're hoping for the best. Okay, so opportunities, we found that winners, in this case, make you bold. Most of our respondents agree that collaboration is important, but less than half see a value in scorecarding on a regular basis. Ironically, in this particular part of the business, part of the retail business, laggards are actually ahead of the curve. They see more opportunity in factory audits. They see more opportunity in cost reduction through managing their own freight. They have a lot of interest in going direct. The net is we expect to see cost containment plus better quality. Larger retailers are clearly better equipped, but they're still short on the basics of what it takes to get where they need to go. So here you can see the larger retailers are better equipped. They see more opportunity. 71% reported there's a big opportunity in collaborating with suppliers in product design versus only about half of retailers that are smaller. About over half report that there's opportunity in scorecarding suppliers on a regular basis versus only 44% of those who are smaller. Now, we didn't ask, this wasn't a binary set of decisions. They could have said they saw lots of opportunities in all these things. So we were kind of surprised to see that only half thought there was opportunity, a lot of opportunity in scorecarding suppliers on a regular basis. Similarly, while they want to find and keep dependable partners, that's one of their biggest challenges, only half report that there's an opportunity in creating long-term contracts, in doing factory audits, in doing post-production audits prior to shipment. So it was kind of shocking to us to see this lack of, for want of a better word, passion for scorecarding and for auditing, or for working the bottom half of what I called the virtuous cycle before. And again, if we look, we can see that laggards, who are in the red in this chart, are actually a bit more forward-thinking. They were as interested as winners in collaborating on product design, more open to doing factory audits, more interested in post-production audits, more interested in managing their own freight, more interested in opening sourcing offices, more interested on having their suppliers report on pre-production status of raw materials. This didn't all make it onto the chart. And you can see that there are still some winners who have some interest in continuing bidding events, though clearly that's in significant decline. So this is a really surprising and counterintuitive finding to us, just as the organizational inhibitors have turned out to be somewhat surprising to us. In this benchmark, we found winning was actually a detriment to moving forward. Messier technology infrastructures, for one thing. A lack of a desire to fix what's working. I mean, the product is selling, why mess with, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And a long-established process that proves very challenging and resistant to change. Laggards' concerns were much more evenly divided. They're concerned about return on investment, their own technology infrastructures. They have challenges with their cultures. They're worried about past failures, where there's been lots of promise of improvement through adoption of technology and not obvious, results. Very stovepipe organizations. Laggards tend to collaborate less within their enterprises. So how do you solve this challenge? Winners do seek to fix what's broken, and laggards clearly need a champion to get them started. So here's this slide is titled, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave." You can see the organizational inhibitors that take advantage of the opportunities they identified. Clearly, 75% of retail winners, which is a kind of shocking number, report that a top 3 issue is that their existing technology or infrastructure prevents them from moving forward with new solutions. 58% of winners report it's really challenging for them to move past, this is how we've always done it. They can't stop moving fast enough to absorb the process changes that are required to change the way they do business. As I mentioned before, laggards, half of them are concerned about proving the return on investment. You can see there's a bit of a difference between laggards and winners in whether or not they even need something. Internal departments tend to be stovepipe and have difficulty working together. That's pretty. This is actually less. I've seen more dramatic studies where this is an issue. This is pretty common theme amongst those who underperform, that they have very stovepipe organizational structures. Some numbers think that the value of technology is overstated, and some numbers say this product doesn't merit this kind of effort. We sell simple things. Yet no winners think that their products are that simple that they don't require effort. That's kind of an interesting finding right there. So how do you solve these organizational inhibitors that I outlined? We see there's some aggregate shifts in coping mechanisms. Now here we've switched from what respondents reported in 2008 versus what they reported this year. There's a lot of interest, especially after the recession, especially after the challenges with working capital, to collaborate with suppliers, that's merchandise suppliers, not the vendors, on costs and implementation. There's been a persistent interest among about a third of the respondents to read more success stories and case studies. 46% now, they believe more than ever that line of business champions are very important to help change the process. As I said, that was even more important for laggards. Everyone is looking for better technology integration tools. Point-to-point integration just isn't going to work anymore because the number of points has become astronomical, and it's really become quite a challenge. And you can see this is a dramatic change from 2008, the recognition that this is really a precursor, a prerequisite to moving forward. There's some interest in hosted solutions that's come along, and obviously there's a continued interest in interdisciplinary teams to investigate the benefits. You don't just want the product managers involved, you also want the guys from logistics and the supply chain, and even potentially the people from the stores or the channels to work together to understand the value of having early warning systems around private label products. Here we can see that laggards and winners tend to see things differently. we took a look at this by performance level, and you can see again, laggards are most interested in line of business champions. Winners really understand the need for improved technology tools, integration tools. If you remember, they have the most tangled infrastructures, so certainly having better integration tools will help them. And laggards are definitely interested in seeing more success stories. They have much more of a show-me mentality, whereas winners tend to be a bit more forward-thinking and a little less fearful of taking the risk. So what does this tangled web we talked about look like, and how do we get out of it? What are technology enablers that are in use, and where can we go from here? There was some hope that we sensed in the survey, but we see a bit of thrashing. We know that larger retailers see a lot of potential in technology enhancements. Some are just a little bit unrealistic about their expectations. Clearly, there are still way too many applications used to do the job, and more often than not, at least one of those applications is a spreadsheet. And it's not like a spreadsheet is a dirty word. It just may not, you may be torturing it beyond the point that it's made to be used for. There also, again, as I mentioned earlier, seems to be a real lack of clarity between what's an application versus what's a feature of an application and what's currently used. And finally, what are retailers' buying plans? What do your peers think they're going to buy over the coming months and years? Clearly, the largest retailers see a lot of potential in various technologies to take advantage of the opportunities they highlighted, which were, again, to improve their product quality, to find and keep dependable partners. Supply chain visibility software is ranked very, very highly. It's highly prized for its potential value to help solve these challenges. 68% of retailers with revenue over $1 billion highlighted this. 60% of these largest retailers highlighted global sourcing, PLM software, and forecasting engines as technologies that can really help them out. There's a topic called lead time optimization, which somewhere between 40 and 50% of respondents think have potential value. We haven't seen a lot of use cases in retail as of lead time optimization really being effective. Nonetheless, retailers sort of hold out hope for it. And you can see that the largest retailers are very interested in supplier scorecarding. Over half of them see opportunity there. Yet they have a hard time actually implementing that. This is kind of a really interesting slide, and it shows pretty consistently year after year how many we ask respondents on average, how many different software applications do you use to design, source, track, and verify your inbound private label merchandise. Interesting data points here, because we found that the smallest retailers are more apt to use fewer applications because they probably have bought some small package from someone than the largest retailers. And what was probably the most shocking is that 16% of the largest retailers use spreadsheets all the time to design, source, track, and verify inbound private label merchandise. That was kind of a really shocking number to us, just as the fact that 12% use more than 5 applications to do the same kind of task. So 28% of the largest retailers that we surveyed are using either a plethora of applications or rows and columns to track that which is the key to their sustainable profitability, the key to their improved gross margin. While the smaller retailers tend to be able to use fewer applications. Nonetheless, 3 to 5 applications is kind of a lot, if you think about it, and more than 5 is scary. So what are the parts and pieces that are used? What make up those applications? Product specifications and requirements, sourcing applications, quality management, supplier relationship management applications, visibility, these are currently in use, factory audit management, process and workflow quite a bit less, sample management, and portfolio and program management. These are the parts and pieces that are in use, but there's an interesting shift in plans going forward. 35% of respondents plans to implement some kind of process and workflow management, to help support their private label product lifecycle. Another 33% are thinking about sourcing, sample management, factory audit management, product and portfolio management, collaborative design, and quality management. And then about 30% visibility. The question is, are these components features of an application, or are they applications themselves? We submit that these are features of an application, not separate and disparate applications. And so our recommendation to retailers is that they take a look, you take a look, and kind of evaluate when you're buying something, if you're buying something that's complete enough so that you can implement pieces and parts as you go to get you to a whole when you're done. And along those lines, I'm going to go through recommendations in general. We think, I kind of hinted at that just a moment ago, get into a portfolio mindset. When you're thinking about the technology enablers that you want to use to support private label management, think about the process from product ideation through actual consumption. And think about what is the kind of portfolio that one would need that integrates and fits together to make that work. We think that's a really important first step to evaluating what kind of product lifecycle management or private label management systems that you actually use. Second, we suggest pretty strongly to conduct an analysis of the ways to improve transit times. In one of my jobs before becoming an analyst, I actually used to help design fairly sophisticated warehouse management systems, both the material handling side and also the technology side. And the first thing that we used to do as a company was we would take a look at the choke points. When you were looking at warehouse throughput, you would look at the various choke points where you might stall in the process. Does it take time to count the product? Are we stuck? Back then, we used to actually ticket some product ourselves in the warehouse. Does it take time? How much time does it take to do the ticketing? How much time does it take to do the sortation or the pre-boxing by store? How much time does it take to ship it? We need to do the same kind of analysis in our extended supply chain so that we can understand what are the tools and techniques we can use to actually improve the transit time to levels that make some sense. Because more than 6 weeks really does seem too long to go from port to shelf. No matter if you're selling in Europe with factories in Eastern Europe, or you're selling in Manhattan with factories in China. And then finally, our last suggestion is to work what we called the virtuous cycle that we introduced earlier in the slide deck. And that is not just find and keep dependable partners and kind of collaborate with them on design, but also to scorecard them both pre and post factory release. So that kind of concludes my part of the presentation. And I don't know if we've got any questions or not, but I'll turn it back to Tradestone. Guys?
We do. Thank you, Paula, very, very much. And thank you for all of your questions that have come in. I've been trying to sort them as we go. Paula, one of the questions for clarification, I guess, is on your going around the world slide. You talked about cycle time from Shanghai to Manhattan.
Yes.
Were you talking about finished product and transit time, or were you talking about a larger cycle?
Nope, finished product transit time. It was from port to distribution center. Question was very specific.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question on one of your latter slides about the 16% or so of retailers who said that they only used spreadsheets.
Yes.
Was there any common thread, either by size, vertical?
Yeah, those were retailers over $1 billion.
Okay.
And again, 68% of the, I think, if I remember, about 68% of the respondents were general merchandise and apparel. So I think it's fair to say that percentage, it probably goes down just a little bit as you get bigger because a lot of the little retailers are GMA retailers, but it's clearly over 50%.
Great. We got several questions in asking for some clarification on your point about applications versus features of an application. I wonder if you could spend another minute or two and help to clear that up.
Supply chain visibility it tends to be a feature that's a culmination of knowing a whole bunch of other things. So rather than seeing it in isolation and saying I'm going to buy a supply chain visibility application, you would want to think about I'm going to buy an application that allows me to select my vendor, to see the status to help support them in design, and then finally to see the status of where the product is as it help select somebody to ship it for me, if you will, and then to see the status as we go. So that's one really classic example of something that's a feature as opposed to an application. Does that make sense? If you buy it as its own application, you're going to run into more of the same integration woes that we're already kind of buried in. That's the fundamental difference.
Great, thank you for that. We have another question that asked your thoughts, I guess, on scorecarding and why it wasn't viewed as more important.
I haven't got a clue. I mean, I could have been probably more negative than I came across. I've been covering this space for 7 or 8 years pretty steadily, and I don't understand how you would, like we said, collaborate and then hope for the best. I have no sense of it, to be honest, beyond that it costs money and it costs time, right? To actually look at the product every time it comes out of the factory, to track it by factory, to then scorecard the vendors. It takes time, and that means money, and in a down economy, that's going to be a place where you might look to cut the corner. It's a bad decision because your brands, our brands as retailers, are so tied in with that which we sell, especially when it's our private brand, when it's our own brand, that you would really want to. There's nothing worse than putting, and I'll use clothes for example, picking out a size 10 blouse in this store that you like, but they don't have it in the right color. So you ask them to ship it to you in the other color from another store, which of course everyone can do now. It's a cross-channel world. And then it shows up and the fit is not the same. That's really disconcerting. That's inconsistent product quality. That's one definition of inconsistent product quality. Why it's not scorecarded more? Again, it costs money. And why retailers don't do it more? That's the best reason I can give you. I think it's incredibly short-sighted, but that's what I think.
Great, thank you. Your thoughts perhaps about why the percentages are so different in the perception of technology's potential between the larger companies and the smaller ones?
I think that larger retailers' mass really works to their advantage in managing private label. And so I think that's probably why, that they believe they can afford the technology more, they believe that it can help them more, and they believe that they can get more favorable prices and make more happen in general. Make sense?
Yep, it does to me. Hopefully it does to our audience as well.
If that doesn't in the audience, please ask another question.
Okay. I guess a clarification question. When you talk about laggards, do you mean that they are sort of absolute poor performers, or are they lower performers in the population of your survey?
Absolute. When we ask a question, it's a very straightforward question. Average year-over-year comparable store sales increases in normal years runs about 3%. Over the past 3 years now, we ask because last year was such an anomaly. Over the past 3 years, has your company performed above that average, at that average, or below that average? Pretty straightforward question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts that you can share with the group about how to surmount or how to start thinking about these existing technology problems a little bit differently? Is there a best practice? Are you seeing a shift in thinking toward a more holistic view that you flagged earlier in the talk, or is it really just because of technology issues and how they relate to processes that use them?
No, I'm sorry I wasn't more clear. It's really a hallmark of retail winners, or those whose sales end up overperforming, that they tend to work more collaboratively within their company. And so this notion of creating interdisciplinary teams is a pretty big deal. And so the first thing to do is to get a team of people who understand the process together and talk about how it can be improved, and define the is, and then define the would like it to be. Start taking steps to move towards that, quote, would like it to be, and then find technology to support that desired end state. It absolutely can't be done just with technology. It has to be driven by people. What we find is that, particularly in laggard organizations, it has to be driven by a champion from the top, because generally that's the only way you get the money allocated, to be honest, and you get the people allocated, the resource allocation. But definitely it starts with understanding the process, understanding the culture, understanding the resistance to change, finding ways to overcome that resistance to change. It's not always my way or the highway. That's not always the smart way to go. Sometimes there's other ways to do it. And then start to map out how would you like it to be if you had your best, if you could, how would you like it to work? And then try and make that work manually, if you will, and then find a technology that supports that what you want to do.
Okay, great. We had a number of questions, and thank you, Paula. We had a number of questions in on total landed cost. And I think the way to characterize them all as a group is there was some surprise that it's still, a problem, or I guess maybe is it still a problem for most retailers, or do you think they have their arms around it?
No, I don't think they have their arms around it, and it's a function of what people are paid for. People do what they're paid to do. As long as a product manager is compensated based on selling gross margin as opposed to loaded gross margin, that's all that they're going to focus on. We've worked with a number of retailers who will tell you that they go for the lowest, they go for the highest IMU, period, full stop. And it has to do with the fact that they know someone's going to dictate that they have to run a promotion. And so they'll make a certain set of decisions around both volumes and timing that may or may not result in the lowest total landed cost. We believe all of our data and all of our anecdotal research tells us that this remains a big problem. And the other reason it remains a problem is that there was a pendulum swing for a while in some industries. In some segments, there was an attempt to go to activity-based costing, which is so granular that no one could really execute it. So that didn't work out very well either. So we've gone back to what people are generally compensated on, which is selling gross margin. So yeah, I do believe that the total, I guess another way to call it is, another phrase that's used is total cost to serve. And no, I don't think that retailers have their arms around that. I have no data that supports that at all.
Okay, thank you. We had a question that's on a somewhat different topic, but there was some curiosity about your thoughts on success of setting up a retailer setting up their own sourcing offices overseas as opposed to sourcing through agents.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this before a little bit. When it makes economic sense, it's a good thing to do. There's no question. And that analysis has to go on, I think, every year. At what point is it economically feasible to have your own office there versus using an agent? And how educated are you in the private label process? It was fascinating to find that Walmart, of all companies, created a partnership with Li & Fung and actually created a separate division of Li & Fung to support their sourcing processes, and the reason was pretty straightforward. They felt they needed some expertise in learning how to do it better. So you'd want to use an agent either A, to teach you, B, because it's more economical for you, and then move to your own when you know how to do it and when it makes economic sense.
Do you have some thoughts, I'm sure you do you have some opinion on why it's taking retailers in general so long to take, let's call it a more enlightened view, a holistic view, I think you said in one of your earlier slides?
I suppose it's really that if it seems as if the gross margin keeps going up, if it ain't broke, why would you fix it? I suppose is the perception, and there's not too much recognition of not too much recognition that there might be more money to be saved, more money to be made if things were done a different way. I think that's why I said earlier on, I think that in this particular area, winning becomes a detriment to moving forward, and that's unusual.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a question, and it might be one that you'll want to take offline, and if so, we'll make some connections. Do you have a perspective on what you've seen as sort of the best technology and process combination?
No, yeah, there are other companies that review the various technology vendors. Is that what you're asking, or?
Yeah, I think that's what the question is really about.
Yeah, there are magic quadrants for that. We don't do that.
Okay, very good. And we can certainly refer some of the folks on the call here to some reports that we have, vendor reports that we have access to. So feel free to contact us directly at info@tradestonesoftware.com for that one. I think we have time for one more question, and kind of an interesting one. Again, it's asking for your view on, in your experience, on the success of private label brands that aren't carrying the retailer's own name. Does it help revenue growth, or does it wind up diluting? Other efforts?
I don't think it winds up diluting other efforts. I don't think anyone would argue that Kirkland is associated with Costco, and that Kirkland has become a pretty good brand. But what is the Walmart one? Is Great Ideas, I think. I think they'd probably be better served to just call it Walmart's Best or something like that. It kind of depends on how fast you want to ramp up. Department stores mix the brands, their private brands and even their manufacturers' exclusive brands so much that it just creates a lot of obfuscation as far as I can see. Do I think we'd be better off with Macy's Best? It's hard for me to say. I know that that company made a lot of effort in ink and Style and Company and their various other brands. If I knew the answer to that one, I'd probably be a merchant instead of an analyst.
Fair point. Well, Paul, on behalf of TradeStone and all of our many participants from around the world today, I really want to thank you for a very informative session. I want to thank you for the research that you did and very candid and very lucid answers to the questions. So we very much appreciate that. And to all of you on the call, we will be making this available for download sometime next week. So please feel free to drop us a note if you wish, or to visit our website. And once again, thanks so much. And if any questions pop up that you hadn't thought of, is please feel free to send those notes along to info@tradestonesoftware.com, and we'll make sure they get to the right people. Thanks again for joining, and we'll look forward to having you on our next webinar.